we see a robed figure standing on a plane of molten glass. Behind him is the side of a mountain and an entrance into a deep cave. He is standing with his back to that cave, and there is blood on his hands and on his feet. There's blood spattered across the entryway to that cave, across the stone floor, bleeding into the glass of this plane, across the outcroppings that jut out from above the opening. He stands there and looks across this vast plain of glass to where a ship is waiting. And then he hears a rasping from behind him. There's a figure dragging itself across the ground, leaving a streak of blood behind. And this figure reaches up a twisted and gnarled hand towards this figure and says, "Why? We took you in. We taught you everything we knew. Why have you betrayed us like this? Why?" And then the hand falls and the body goes limp. And that figure, still standing with his back to the cave, turns his head, and a mask covers the lower half of his face. His eyes are angry, and his dark hair has been slicked back with blood. And he says, "You have taught me everything you knew. And now that I have taken the knowledge that your order has kept secret for 100 years, I will go and conquer. It is my right." And then he walks away from the cave, from the blood, from the destruction he leaves behind. Welcome back for another episode of Errant Adventures, the solo actual play podcast where stories are told at the speed of dice. With me, Steve Morrison, your game master and solo player. Now come on, let's grab the dice and see where our story goes. Welcome back for another episode of Season 3, Cry Havoc. Last time, Wolfe waits in the Scirocco Station courtyard for the Azure King's retinue to return. While she waits, she digs into the station computer system and discovers a coded transmission from the Azure King to his commanders. Shortly after that, she realizes the Azure Court soldiers patrolling the courtyard have left. She breaks through the encryption and discovers that the Azure King has ordered his troops off the station, and he has ordered a complete shutdown and lockdown of the station propulsion, sentencing the station inhabitants to death by orbital decay. As the Azure King's retinue returns through the courtyard toward the docking bay, Wolfe calls out to the people to rise up. She sways them and they charge the group of 20 Azure Court soldiers. The Azure King's guard protects him and cuts their way toward the lift down to the docking bay. Kiana Arden convinces Commander Volkov to call off his soldiers and turn against the Azure King. Wolfe and Arden meet up in the fray, and Arden gives Wolfe her iron blade. Together they attack the Azure Guard and cut their way through until Wolfe faces off with the Azure King. He offers her anything her heart desires. There's only one thing she wants: peace. And peace won't come to Veiled Rest until the Azure King is deposed. Wolfe is facing off against the Azure King, blade raised above her head, ready to strike him down. When he starts to laugh, he laughs in her face, in the face of death, and then he throws back his robe that he's wearing. And she sees underneath that he is naked to the waist. Except instead of flesh, there is a strange amalgamation of iron and obsidian. And he is wearing light flowing pants. He throws off the cloak and then he raises his hands, and the Azure Guard begin to move and rise up. And behind Wolfe, there's a sharp inhale of breath, and Arden says, "He's a paragon, and it is time to enter the fray." When you initiate combat or are forced into a fight, envision your objective and give it a rank. That's easy. Defeat the Azure King. And I have placed this as a formidable challenge. Then roll to see if you're in control. If you are on the move, roll plus edge. Facing off against your foe, roll plus heart. In the thick of it at close quarters, roll plus iron. Preparing to act against an unaware foe, roll plus shadow. Or caught in a trap or sizing up the situation, roll plus wits. Well, unfortunately, I don't think I can justify rolling in the thick of it at close quarters. She is facing off against her foe. She is standing toe-to-toe with this man, this being, and she is looking him in the eyes, ready to strike him dead, when he displays a power that is only whispered of in the halls of the Hunters Collective. So we're going to roll plus heart, see how this goes for Wolfe. +1. 4 on the action score, 5 and an 8 on the challenge dice, 4 a miss. On a miss, the fight begins with you in a bad spot. That makes sense. Wolfe is now surrounded by a collection of undead guards and the Paragon Azure King. The guards rise up, and immediately Wolfe transitions from having her blade over her head to strike. She slides back to a defensive posture as those undead guards rise up and strike at her. This is going to be reacting under fire plus iron because she is blocking or diverting with force or taking the hit. +3. 8 for the action score, a 6 and a 10 on the challenge dice for a weak hit. On a weak hit, you avoid the worst of the danger or overcome the obstacle, but not without a cost. Make a suffer move at -1, stay in a bad spot. So we're going to reduce our spirit down from 5 to 4, as I think Wolfe is slightly intimidated by this collection of undead warriors that is now trying to kill her, because before she made short work of the Azure King's guard, but she's not sure that striking them down again is going to ensure that they're going to stay down. As she transitions into this defensive posture, the Azure Guard charge in at her, and she is deflecting blows as she is backing up. And then she finds that Arden is right behind her, at her back, protecting her back, and together they're standing there fighting as the Azure Guard are circling around them, and Wolfe is going to clash with iron, and because she's a blade master, she gets to add +1 to this. So +4 on this clash. 8 for the action score, a 7 and a 10 on the challenge dice for a weak hit. On a weak hit, mark progress, but you are dealt a counter blow or setback. You stay in a bad spot and must pay the price. So we can mark 1 box of progress on here, but let's roll pay the price. 86. You are stressed. Okay. So she is fighting back to back with Kiana Arden, and these undead guards are closing in around her. She cuts one down, it falls to the ground, and then immediately starts to rise again. And she's already on to the next one, parrying a blow and then slicing up and around. She actually separates a limb and it goes flying, and the creature just continues to attack at her. And we're going to reduce our spirit from 4 to 3 as Wolfe is facing this horrific scene of these undead creatures. I think that the Azure King is trying to make his escape. He's created a distraction here, but Wolfe is not so easily distracted from her goal. And so she is going to attempt to maneuver and dodge and get in between the Azure King and the exit out of this courtyard. All the people who were here that were watching as the Azure King and Wolfe were facing off are running in terror as they have watched the Azure King bring his guard back from the dead. So Wolfe is maneuvering using edge, trying to get between the Azure King and his escape. So +2 on this, 5 on the action score, 2 and a 6 on the challenge dice for another weak hit. You avoid the worst of the danger, overcome the obstacle, but not without a cost. Make a suffer move at -1 and stay in a bad spot. I think she has to sacrifice some health here to successfully maneuver. She feels Arden at her back. She slips into battle mode and she says, Van, I have to get between the Azure King and his escape. Break on 3. 1, 2, 3. And she feels Arden push off and head in the other direction as Wolfe dives forward, rolls between 2 Azure guards as they slash down. She rolls up onto her feet, and then another one slams into her side, trying to tackle her. She is able to push down on its shoulder, using the blade as leverage to kind of press it off and away from her. And she once again gets her sword in and around and separates one of its arms from its shoulder socket, and then spins away, stumbling forward as the Azure King is backing away towards this lift that will lead down. And she's going to charge directly at the Azure King, and once again is going to clash with Iron at +4. 5 for the action score, a 4 and a 6 on the challenge dice for another weak hit. So marking progress, but we're going to take another pay the price. Cannot get myself a strong hit to save my life. So our pay the price is 78. You are harmed. Okay, so she charges forward, and again, she is dodging these Azure guards, these undead creatures, as they are pursuing her, and she charges straight towards the Azure King as he is backing up, watching her, hands sort of gesturing like marionettes, and she swings her sword hard, and it skids and crashes across the metal and obsidian on his chest, and sparks flash, and they kind of distract her for a moment. And then she feels this punch of a blade in her side as it kind of scrapes across her rib cage, and she's going to take another health. That's going to drop down to 2 health, and I think I am going to roll and endure harm. If your health is 0, lose momentum. It's not, roll health or iron, whichever is higher. So our iron is at +3, which is higher than our 2 health. So she is trying to resist that cut to her side, and we're going to roll +3 on this. 7 for the action score, a 7 and a 10 on the challenge dice is a miss. On a miss, it would worsen. Suffer an additional -1 health or lose momentum -2. Well, I can't do that. I can't go that way. So I'm going to mark a segment on my fugitive path. You are hunted by a power or authority. When you make a move, you may improve the result to a strong hit. If you do, fill 1 segment of a 4-segment clock to represent hunters closing in. When the clock is filled, a notable force or foe has tracked you down. If you overcome them or escape, reset the clock and mark 1 tick on your quest's legacy track. So we're going to create a 4-part clock. This is the fugitive clock. And we are going to mark 1 segment on it as we turn that endure harm into a strong hit. Now you might ask, isn't the Azure King the one who is hunting her? Well, yes, he is. But also, isn't the Hunters Collective also hunting her? So she's a fugitive from multiple people. So on a strong hit for endure harm, we can shake it off. If you're not wounded, take +1 health, or embrace the pain and take a momentum. I'm going to take the health back. She feels the blade touching her side, and she manages to spin with it as the cut comes in. And it scrapes her side a little bit, but she is able to, for the most part, avoid being skewered by this blade. And then she is going to push forward and is going to attempt to attack the Azure King once again. But again, she's trying to get between him and the door, and she hasn't quite gotten the whole way there yet. So I think before she sets herself up to attack, she is going to attempt to maneuver again. And because we got the strong hit on the endure harm, we gain control of this fight. So she stumbles away from that cut. It's at that point that Kiana Arden comes flying in and drop kicks the undead guard that was trying to stab Wolfe in the back. And the two of them go scattering off to the side as Wolfe now has an opening. And she runs forward, aiming to cut off the Azure King as he has now turned and is retreating back towards that lift door. So plus edge on this. 8 for the action score, 5 and a 1 on the challenge dice for a strong hit. With gain ground, I get to choose 2. I can mark progress, I can take momentum, or I can take +1 to my next move. I'm going to take the momentum and the progress. Our momentum moves up to 8. Our progress moves up to 3 out of 10 boxes of progress. And Wolfe has maneuvered her way between the Azure King and the door, and she is going to strike. +4 on this. Once again, she's a Blade Master, so she gets +1. Here we go. 5 on the action score, a 1 and a 2 on the challenge dice for a strong hit. Mark progress twice. You dominate your foe and stay in control. We're now at 5 out of 10 progress. Wolfe maneuvers her way between the Azure King and his escape. And she says, "Not so fast." And she steps in, and her blade sings in a flurry of activity as she is trying to find a place to puncture through this defense around his chest. The Azure King is more nimble than he seems, and seems to be dodging and weaving out of the way as she's cutting towards his legs and his head, and he raises up an arm to deflect, and his forearm and everything is made of that same metal and obsidian combination, and sparks fly. But Wolfe keeps up the tempo and is driving him back towards the center of this courtyard. And she can see behind him that Kiana Arden has taken a blade from one of the Azure guards and is stabbing it into the undead creature that she drop-kicked away from Wolfe. Commander Volkov and his Azure court soldiers are struggling against other Azure guards. And then a few more of those Azure guards are rushing to defend their king. Wolfe, seeing this, I think she's just going to continue striking at the Azure King, thinking that if she can strike him down, she can end this fight. She can end this battle. She can end this terrible, terrible course of events. So +4 on this. Here we go again. 6 for the action score, an 8 and a 10 on the challenge dice is a miss. Now, I could just keep hammering on that fugitive asset, but I feel like that would be a little too easy and a little too convenient, and honestly, a little less dramatic. So Wolfe drives forward, she raises the blade above her head and strikes down once again in a decisive blow. And this time, the Azure King just reaches up a hand and grabs the blade and holds it there. he grins and he says,
"You are an impressive fighter, Wolfe. But you are no match for the ancient powers I wield. Yield to me, and I will show you mercy."
Wolfe grits her teeth as she's trying to struggle out of this bind that the Azure King has on her. And she says, "I've seen your mercy, and I won't suffer it." She is caught in this bind as these Azure guards close in around her, and it's time to pay the price once again. 88. Stressed. She's stressed. And I'm actually going to take 2 hits to spirit on this one because this was a complete miss. So it's a pretty significant amount of stress as she's trying to pull out of this bind, but somehow the Azure King's hands are also made of the same like iron and obsidian combination, and he's able to just hold the sword in place, and she's struggling to pull it free before the Azure guards close in around her, and she's going to try to endure some stress here. So she is going to roll spirit or heart, whichever is higher. They're both at 1, which is not great for us, but gotta endure that stress. +1. 6 for the action score, 2 7s for the challenge dice is a miss, but you know what? I've got 8 momentum to burn, so I'm gonna burn it now to turn that into a strong hit with a match. So on a strong hit, shake it off. Take +1 spirit or take +1 momentum. I'm going to take the spirit back up to 2. She shakes it off. She feels for a moment frozen in place, mesmerized by the malice in the Azure King's eyes. And then she realizes that she can hear Kiana Arden, Vanguard, her old friend, yelling at her to move. And Wolfe sort of shakes off the fugue state, twists the blade, and pulls it out. There's this shower of sparks and this awful sound that it makes. But she is able to recover, and she is going to withdraw a little bit and try to gain a little bit of space to deal with these Azure Guard as they're closing in on her. And we're going to gain ground once again with Edge, which is +2. 3 on the action score, a 4 and a 7 on the challenge dice. For a miss, the dice are turning against your foe. Gains the upper hand. The fight moves to a new location, or you encounter a new peril. You are in a bad spot and must pay the price. Let's roll to pay the price and see what that tells us. 10. You create an opportunity for an enemy. Well, obviously, it's an opportunity for the Azure King to escape. Wolfe has to withdraw because these Azure guards are closing in on her. And if she stays within the Azure King's reach, she's going to potentially get bound up again, and she's going to run out of space to maneuver. So she's forced to retreat, and she watches the Azure King run for the lift as these Azure Guard close on her. She is going to grit her teeth, reset her hold on her blade, and she is going to stride into battle ferociously as she clashes. Plus iron, +1 for her Blade Master asset. 6 for the action score, 8 and a 10 for the challenge dice. The dice have turned against us. On a miss, your foe dominates this exchange. Stay in a bad spot and pay the price. 60. Your equipment or vehicle malfunctions. I've been waiting for this one. So Wolfe is standing there, and these Azure guards are closing in on her. She resets her grip. She steps forward, her blade sings through the air, and these Azure guards meet her blade with their own and deflect and are blocking, and she is finding no way through. And it seems as though a few of the other Azure guards have been felled by Commander Volkov and his troops, and maybe by Kiana Arden. And the fewer the guards there are, the more efficient and dangerous the ones remaining are, as if they are driven by the Azure King's attention, by his malice. Wolfe is trying to fight them off. One of them drives the blade down and locks her into place down there, and she tries to resist, but she can't pull away, and there's another sword that's angling in towards her heart, and she has to let go of the sword and dive to the side unarmed. She is going to try and open up some space, but this time she's scrambling back on her hands and her feet, scrambling back away from the Azure Guard as they turn towards her. She can see the Azure King in the distance, close to the lift, almost out of reach, almost to escape. And she is going to react under fire once again with edge as she is scampering away, trying to slip away from these Azure Guards. +2 on this, 7 on the action score, a 6 and a 1 on the challenge dice for a strong hit. So we take back control. That's going to give us +1 momentum as Wolfe scatters back, and I think in that moment, Commander Volkov and his troops open fire on these guards, and a couple of them are pushed back by the weapons fire, and Kiana Arden grabs Wolfe by the shoulder and pulls her up, and the two of them look across, but the Azure King is on the other side of this barrage of fire and is getting away, is almost to the lift. The lift is opening up, and he's gonna slip away into this space, and Wolfe reaches into her crew jumpsuit and pulls out her laser pistol. She aims, and she is going to strike with edge, which is +2. Come on, dice. A 3 on the action score. 2 2s on the challenge dice for a strong hit with a match. Mark progress twice. We're at 7 out of 10 progress. I have a question to ask the Oracle. Because we got a match, is it possible that instead of shooting the Azure King, Wolfe shoots the controls to the lift? Because as we all know, if you shoot the controls, the doors shut and they will never open again. Because we got a match, I'm going to say it's 50-50 that she hit the controls and that the lift is going to be inaccessible. 48 is just barely a yes. So the Azure King runs over to the lift. He hits the button and he is turning back, looking. He's marionetting his Azure Guard with his fingers, trying to kill Wolfe, trying to kill Kiana Arden, trying to kill Volkov and the others. And the number above the lift door is counting up as the lift is rising up from the docking level when across the open courtyard. Wolfe takes aim, first at the Azure King's head, but she's not sure if a laser bolt to the head is going to kill this man. She's stabbed and slashed at him so many times, and then she adjusts her aim and fires. And the console next to him explodes and sparks fly, and he stumbles away. And for a second, the Azure Guards stop moving. And then they turn and again commence their attacks against the assembled forces. And the Azure King brushes this off as these sparks scatter across him, and the lift door doesn't open. And he kind of... And then he turns to find some other way out, some other exit from here. And Wolfe is running across. She slides down and picks up her blade and charges forward. And she is going to attempt to gain ground with edge, +2. 7 for the action score, a 5 and a 7 on the challenge dice for a weak hit, which means I get to choose one. I can take progress, I can take momentum, or I can add +1. I'm going to take the progress. That takes us to 8 out of 10 boxes of progress. Wolfe, sprinting through the courtyard past this chaos of the handful of Azure Court soldiers who are still standing, fighting their former allies, the Azure King's guard, who are now undead. Volkov is standing there, shooting a gun at a couple of these things as they're closing in on him. Kiana Arden has a blade and has pulled armor off of one and is using it to deflect blows from some of the Azure Court soldiers. Wolfe is running through this utter chaos as the Azure King is seeking another way out. And Wolfe charges forward, blade held high, as with that explosion, with those sparks, she saw something on his neck. A blister formed from the heat of the explosion, and she charges forward and with the point of her blade is going to attempt to drive it through that blister into the Azure King's neck. We're going to take decisive action. We have 8 progress. We're going to roll our challenge dice and see what the dice tell us. We've got a 3 and a 4 on the challenge dice versus our progress of 8 is a strong hit. You prevail. Take +1 momentum. So we're going to take a momentum as her blade punches through the Azure King's throat. And with a gurgle, his eyes widen and his hands stop moving, and the Azure guard stutter and then fall to the courtyard floor, unmoving. And Wolfe leans on the blade and drives the Azure King down to his knees. And he looks up at her, and he's kind of gurgling a little bit as blood is leaking out of this wound in his neck. And he looks up into her eyes and he says,
"You will never know peace."
Wolfe, looking down at him, says, "Maybe not, but if the people of Veiled Rest get some peace, it'll have been worth it." And she drives it the rest of the way into his abdomen, and he jerks once and then goes slack and limp where he's kneeling. And the battle is done. The Azure King is dead. And we can mark another box of progress on Get Kiana Arden off of Scirocco Station. That takes us to 4 out of 10 boxes of progress. Now, what, might you ask, do we need a progress track for getting Kiana Arden off the station if the Azure King is dead? Surely all the conflict has been bled out of this situation because there is no more Azure King, and there's nothing keeping Wolfe and Arden on Scirocco Station. Unfortunately for the two of them, alarm klaxons begin to sound. A voice begins to speak. Warning, orbital decay imminent. Warning, orbital decay imminent. Warning, orbital decay imminent. This warning continues as Kiana Arden rushes over to Wolfe and grabs her by the shoulder and says, "Come on, we've got to move. We've got to get off this station." Wolfe turns and looks at Arden and says, "You go, but I can't leave if there's a chance that I can stop the station from losing orbit. There's not enough time to evacuate the people on the station. If I can't stop this orbital decay, all these people are going to die, and I can't let that happen. Get off the station. Get as far as you can. I've got to go up to the command deck." Arden looks at her with a mixture of humor and affection and says, "Wolfe, you didn't leave me behind. You were true to your word, and so I'm not going to leave you behind. Let's go." And they turn and they run back across the courtyard, heading towards the other bank of lifts that will head up to the command deck, where the station controls are housed. And as they're going, Volkov says, "Wait, where are you two going?" And they explain. And he looks around. Arden says, "It's okay. Do whatever you have to. Get as many people off the station as you can. And go." He looks around for a brief moment at the 4 Azure Court soldiers who are still standing from his command. And then he says, well, it's been a strange day, but good luck, and I wish you well. And he's going to gather his soldiers and lead them away. Wolfe and Arden look at each other, nod. Wolfe offers her back her sword, and Arden shakes her head and says, no, it's yours now. And then together the two of them race towards the lifts up to the command deck to see if they can save Scirocco Station from an imminent demise. Thanks for listening to Errant Adventures, and thanks so much to Syrinscape for the lovely ambient sounds and music throughout the episode. If you enjoyed the show, please spread the word, and if you want to support the show directly, leave me a review or buy me a coffee at ko-fi.com/errantadventures. If you want to interact with me, I'm at Errant Solo Pod on Twitter and Instagram, or you can email me at errantsolopod@gmail.com. I also post campaign-related materials on my website, errantadventurespod.com. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.